Mr. Davis?
Yep,
Thank you. Thank you for
He's
coming.
on the right.
Yes.
I'm on the right. Are you ready to, are you taping and doing all that good stuff? All right. All right, I'm Keith Davis again, and this is the first time I did this, but this process of petitions, it's the oddest thing is when we go out to get signatures, it's like 80% of the people have no idea about it. And it's like, why not? Why do people just walk by you, or they have misconceptions about petitions? They think they're voting for something. And I've even signed petitions where I don't agree with what they're doing to get it on the ballot so that we can vote on it, you know, because knowing if it's confident that it will lose at the ballot. But yeah, it doesn't mean you have to avoid it just because. So we need to have a generation of people who will actually notice when someone's asking for signatures and go over and inquire about what they have instead of walking by them. So there you are. And then the whole process, it's a little bit complicated going from you know, each step of it, and no one person does all the different steps of getting petitions. Generally, it's a group of people will put the petition together. In other words, you have to start the petition, or you're a candidate and you want to get on the ballot, so you have to start it. And then people will go out and work for you and collect signatures. And then there might be someone else who takes those signatures and turns them in to town clerks to be certified as being legitimate voter signatures. And then there might be people that collect them back. If it's a statewide initiative like Scott Lively, we just worked on his thing. It's for the whole state, and we were dealing with 250 some of the 350 towns. And so you have to get all this stuff back together again, and then it has to be turned in to the Secretary of State. These petitions are also on local levels, but this is for everything sort of for the state. And I'll tell you, years ago I started working with the Russian community that came into West Springfield and Agawam, and they loved coming over here. It took them 8 years to get in the country. They wanted to come over and vote. The idea that they could vote was like unbelievable to them. And they could have their own businesses and everything. So they came over, they studied, they knew the language, they had a job, and then they became a citizen, and then they registered to vote. And then once they were registered to vote, they said, what more can I do besides just voting? And people would say, well, you could help us out. We're going to stand out with some signs to promote something or protest something. And they loved doing that. And then sometimes these ballot questions and candidates would come up and they'd say, how can we help? And we say, well, we have these sheets that people sign their name to. And they'd say, well, how do we do that? And they want to know. And they might set up a big table in their churches for it. They just love doing this stuff. And so we've been doing this over the years for a lot of different things. But in the packet here on the left side, you've got a few examples of some petition sheets that have come about. A lot of this is in the last couple of years. But there's one sheet here that is for that prevents or would exclude the taxpayers from paying for abortions. And that would institute and create a change in the law that would say we are not required to pay for abortions with taxpayer-funded money. This one, unfortunately, fell 7,000 signatures short of getting enough to get onto the ballot. But if you notice, this one it has a G in the bottom. And these ballot initiatives are assigned letters, and it's not unusual to have up to letter M or N. There's so many that start off during an election cycle that you could have 10 or 12 different ballot initiatives floating around the state. And they have a letter on it, so pretty soon you know yours by the letter. The other one is the bathroom bill. And this is called an appeal petition. This is what this is all about over here from MFI. This one was successful. And this got the minimum of the 65,000 or so certified signatures throughout the state that was needed to get this on the ballot. But if you take a look at these just real quick to see what you have for parts here. On the left side is a list of names. And this is for a ballot initiative. You have, these are 10 people who get together and say, we want to affect a law. We want to introduce a law, we want to repeal a law, we want to change a law. And by doing so, you're basically doing what the legislature does. You have become the legislature of the state. And you do this a lot of times because they pass a bill, like the bathroom bill, which you don't agree with, and you think that most of the people in the state wouldn't want it. So they started this to get this on the ballot. And so those are the 10 people who usually sign on to a petition initiative if it's for a ballot question. And each petition sheet has two sides. One is they hold anywhere from, like this is 18, the bigger ones hold 23 or so different signatures. And they're collected at all different types of locations. You might see somebody at a mall or a supermarket, outside a post office, in a church, if the churches will do these. Sometimes they stay away from political ones for candidates, but they will do ones for ballot questions. And churches are great because you can get like 300 signatures from like 8 towns or something like that, just in one day at a church, in a big church. And so that is, we'll talk about a little bit more about the ballot stuff too. And the other thing you have in there is a couple of sheets that are folded, and this is a candidate's sheet who wants to run for office. You notice this one's a little extra long. It's a little bit longer, and for these you need a nice long clipboard. So that's why you get these when you're doing these. You need a nice clipboard like that. But this is for a candidate. Now a candidate would do this in order to get on the ballot. And these are technically, they're called nomination papers, because everyone who signs this is actually nominating that candidate to be on the ballot. That's what they call it. And if one of these is blank, and on the blank one, you notice up here there's the candidate's name, the party, their address. It varies a little bit depending on if it's state rep or state senate or something. And then the candidate has to sign a couple sheets where he attests that he's a resident. He has to get that certified by the town he lives in to say, yes, this candidate is a resident of this town. And those have to go on sheets that ultimately are turned into the Secretary of State. So usually candidates will fill out like 10 of these, and they'll sign them off and say, I accept the nomination. And then the enrollment certificate, this is taken into a town clerk, and they will complete these and then certifying that you are a resident of a town. Then you take these sheets and mix them in with all the other sheets and go out and get signatures and turn these in, and eventually these work their way back to the Secretary of State, and they have the ones that are all certified for the candidate. But that's just a few of the sheets. And then you start filling the sheets in. Now, some people, what they do is they start on the back side of the sheet, and they put in, like this one has 20 spaces on the back, And the ones getting lots of signatures, and there are people who are paid to get signatures too, can fill in the backside and they know they've got 20 on a sheet. Then they go to another sheet, another sheet. So and we usually start on the front, we do the 3 and then flip it over. But one of the things you have to do is protect these sheets, and sometimes people feel there might be a danger of somebody marking the sheet, doing something to it, and once they get a certain number of signatures, they may put it aside and start a new sheet, thinking that, well, I got 15 good signatures here, I don't want to lose this whole sheet. Because somebody can make an issue of the most trivial, minuscule things, like marks or stray things, coffee stains or whatever on the sheets, and get the whole sheet thrown out where they don't count. And there's people that do that. It generally only happens though if you turn in sheets and you're just at the minimum you need to do, and where somebody might want to go in and challenge them and challenge your sheets because they don't want you in as a candidate, or they don't want your ballot question on. And but if it's more than 10% more than the minimum they need, the Secretary of State accepts all of them, and they will not generally allow a challenge to them. So
on a sheet, if it's just one name that they are clearing, and the rest are all right, are you saying they will actually?
Well, you can have, well, the other copy of here, of the long one, has the red lines on it. These are actual sheets. Now these had 1 or 2 signatures, and in most of the cases here, what you have are ones that were rejected. The signature was rejected for some reason, so there weren't any good signatures on these sheets, and these are not turned into the Secretary of State. So I show these as examples of what the town clerk has to do. So if you take a look at this, and a lot of people just have sheets with 1 or 2 signatures, and the town clerks aren't real happy with that all the time because they have to do all this work on them, but they nevertheless they have to take them. So you can see what happens when you collect these, and what's needed for collection? There's a signature and a street address, and that's it. Almost all the things we've ever worked on, you need a signature and a street address. You're allowed to ask somebody to print their name in that little space there on each line if their signature is impossible to read, because they can print their name. And eventually they're going to allow printing anyway, because kids are not being taught how to write their names anymore, right? So we watch, and as people fill it in, if you can sort of make out who it is, you say, okay, that's good. What happens with the town clerks, when they have these sheets and you turn them in, and each sheet is for a particular town. So if you have 10 towns you're dealing with, you have at least 10 sheets you're dealing with, because you can only have one town on the sheet, on the bottom there, and it's usually on the top and the back and everything. And then what they do is they go to a statewide database. They put in the street name first, then the street number of the address. So you say print your street address there, an apartment number if they have one, and the town clerk looks up who is registered to vote at that address. Then they try to match it up with the name. They say, yeah, I guess that could be Robert, They try to do the best they can to match it up. We found that most town clerks do not argue too much with stuff. Most of them are pretty good, even if they know what you're doing is something they don't agree with, or they're on the other side of. Most of the town clerks in the state are pretty good. So they look it up, and then they see, is that person there at that address? The other thing is, somebody may sign more than one petition sheet, and that's very common. You start the process in May, or maybe in April or something like that, or March. It goes into May. After 6 or 8 weeks, somebody runs across someone at an event, and did you sign? Oh, I don't remember. Well, sign it anyway. And they sign it a second time, and that's okay, because what happens is the computer just says this person already signed once. So if they sign 2 or 3 times, one of their things counts. So then they generally put a red check mark on the left there. These all have a letter of some sort, which is a rejection, and on the back of the sheet there's some letter codes as to why the signature was rejected. Either the person was not in the right party, if it's a partisan thing, they didn't live at the address, they put the wrong town, street for the wrong town or something. There's all kinds of reasons that a town clerk may have to reject them. And when you bring these into them, they're actually supposed to do two things. And this is a kind of a critical thing for the people who are turning these in. They're supposed to time and date stamp them. And in the upper right of the sheets, the ones with the red lines on it, you'll see that there should be a time stamp of some kind up there that shows it was received at a town clerk's office. And there's all these date things that you have to go by. I'll go over those in a second. But the next thing they're supposed to do while you're there is they're supposed to red line them. So they draw the red line through all the rows that are not used, straight across there and all that. And at that point they can put them on the side, and then they sit down when they have a chance and they go into the computer and look things up and they start checking things off. So you can have a full sheet. These held 23 signatures, and I actually saw a couple of sheets with 23 signatures with 23 good signatures, which is amazing because you always get a couple that they kick out. And so then they check them all off, and then they have to sign off with 3 people on the lower right. On the back there's 3 signatures. In some of the smaller towns, these are actually passed from one person to the other, and the registrars, who are the registrar of voters in the town. And other towns and cities have a big stamp with all 3 signatures, and they're saying, yeah, if you think it's good, just and then it's stamped, and you get all 3 signatures that way. And they fill in down here, they write in the number of good signatures on the sheet, and they put the word, like the number 5 and the word 5, and the date they did it, and the town is in the lower right corner. This is important for the people who pick up these petition sheets from the town clerks, is when you get them, you want to make sure they are filled in correctly by the town clerks. And I've turned several back in. They totally forget to stamp them, or it only has 1 signature instead of 3. And those ultimately would be rejected by the Secretary of State if they weren't filled in correctly. So there's these date milestones to do with signatures and petition sheets, whether they're for candidates or whether they're for a ballot initiative. There's a starting date on which you can take out and get these papers made up. And for the ballot initiatives, they have to be written up and submitted to the Secretary of State and the Attorney General, and they have to approve the ballot question petitions, and they actually work on the wording that goes on the petition. You tell them what you want it to do, and they will put the wording on there. The Attorney General's office is supposed to determine if it's a valid question in that it doesn't violate the law or the Constitution. But I'll tell you, they don't always do their job right, because Martha Coakley certified and said this is okay for the Common Core petition. That was what, 3 or 4 years ago, Hal? Common Core. And they said this is a good thing. But then as this was going on, we heard that Bill Gates and all the other people involved in Common Core had Plan B and Plan C if these petition sheets ever started marching through the system toward the ballot. And that was to get Common Core out of the state. So they actually used one of their big plans was to take the whole thing to court. In the court, after all the work had been done, 100 and some thousand signatures were gathered and turned in and certified, and this is a huge thing, you know, when you put that all together. The court threw out the Common Core ballot initiative, saying I think it said it had it was addressing two things and it should have only addressed one thing. It said, get Common Core out, and then it says, here's the plan to replace it. And they said, well, that's two things, and the court threw it out. And we all began to wonder, did the Attorney General and the Secretary of State, did they know that was going to happen? And they let us go through and do this? Or did they just not know the law that well? Or what was the circumstance that got that rejected by a court? So anyway, so there's a date where this all starts. There's a date that you have to have all these turned into the town clerks by. And then you have to collect those, and then there's a date they have to be turned into the Secretary of State. So there's these date milestones when these things are going through. And the reality is nobody really does all the things that you have to do with these things. You are generally involved in the collection of them, like I said earlier, or picking them up or dropping them off or turning them in or something. But it's quite an effort to get things statewide. I've seen this a couple times where, all this stuff was funneled into, from all over the state, and people turned it in when they got the signatures before they went into the town clerks, and then they were delivered to town clerks, and then those were picked up and all delivered back, and you're talking boxes and boxes of these sheets, a lot, when you do a statewide thing. We just did the one for Scott Lively, who is running for governor, and fortunately, a lot of us that were working on it are in the Springfield area. There is a Secretary of State's office on Dwight Street in Springfield. There's one other in the state in Fall River, and we were able to turn in sheets that were collected back from the town clerks, compiled together. We did counts and everything on spreadsheets, and then I brought in 7,500 signatures, pile of sheets this high, into Springfield, which was literally about 1.5 miles from the office we were working from. So you couldn't beat that. And they never saw that many there before. They usually get a little stack from a candidate, and the ballot questions, those all go to Ashburton Place in Boston. So they saw this stack, and it took them a day or so, a few people to go through them, but they did those. And then we turned more in there too, and we turned some in Fall River and some in Boston. So there's all these date things you go by. So who can sign these? You have to be a registered voter, and you have to live in the district or the area the thing is for. If it's a statewide ballot initiative, it can be any voter in any party is allowed to sign. If it's for a candidate for an office, like Scott Lively is registered Republican, then only registered Republicans and unenrolleds or independents can sign the sheets. But if you're a Democrat or in another party like the Green Party, you can't sign. So we've actually encouraged a few Democrats to unenroll by August 15th here so they can vote for Scott, But you have to be in the district. So if it's a state rep district, and some towns are like the city of Holyoke and Westfield, the whole town is one state rep district. You would have to be a resident of that town to sign for that candidate running in that district. State Senate district is bigger. It's usually the equivalent of about 4 state rep districts. And you could sign a sheet for somebody running for state rep if you were from any of those towns. But if you were from outside there, you couldn't sign those. If it's a ballot question, like I say, anybody in the state can generally sign them because it's a nonpartisan thing. And you have to, of course, be a registered voter, too. So this really gives you a chance to take, your right to vote and everything up to another level. Like this one here, the bathroom bill one, the petition process was actually called an appeal petition. And what you're doing as citizens, you're appealing a vote that was made by the legislature. The legislature passed this bill, and the governor signed off on it, but you don't like it, so you're appealing it. And you're thinking, well, what you're doing is you're trying to repeal the bill. And in a way, you're trying to do that. You're trying to repeal the bill. But when this goes to the ballot, it won't be a vote to yes to repeal. It'll be a no vote, meaning you, now you are the legislature voting on this. You say, no, you don't want the law. And that can be confusing, and a lot of times the sides on the issue will mix up the questions and answers of what to tell people to vote for, just to get people to vote the wrong way. So on the bathroom bill, a yes is not yes to repeal, it's yes to have the law. And I think what happens with that is that the law, in effect, on the day of the election, ceases to exist. And then people vote on it. If they vote for it, then the law continues to go on as it was. If they vote no and vote it down, the law ceases to exist at that point. You know, it doesn't come back. So that's and this has a good chance of winning in the state, because now the people will be able to vote on that. And you know, the majority of the people may not look like what that has opened up.
That's fantastic. They don't have that in my state. This is great.
So, yep.
New York.
Well, there's even a way to amend our Constitution. And every state has some kind of process. Massachusetts has a very complex process to amend the state constitution. And you have to get this minimum of 65,000 signatures statewide, and they have to then be passed to the legislature, and at least 25% of the legislature has to agree with it and move it on to another legislative session that comes after an election cycle. So there's technically new people in there, another mix of legislators, and then they have to have 25% of the people of them vote to okay that, and then it moves to the ballot. So to amend the Constitution is a long process. And we had the marriage one, for the vote on marriage one. It made it through the first session. Enough of the legislature voted to pass it on. But after that, there was an election cycle, and some of the people who had voted for it, they had their arms twisted, and they ended up voting against it the second time. And then they threw in a whole bunch of new candidate people to overwhelm some of the state rep districts and get new people in who would vote against it. So that didn't make it through the second session. So, actually, pass that back to him in the back there. So it can be a long process too, if it has anything to do with the Constitution. So, and there's even a situation, I noted at the bottom of the front page here, that what can happen with a ballot initiative is the legislature can have an opportunity to actually vote on your ballot initiative. And if they actually vote for it, it never makes it to the public. It doesn't make it to the ballot because, you know, you want something repealed or you want some law enacted, and the legislature says, okay, let's vote on it, and they vote for it, then it becomes a law or gets repealed or whatever, and it doesn't have to go to the ballot then. But sometimes, I don't know the situation, but we've gone through this before. I think maybe the gas tax one, we had to get a second round of 11,000 more certified new signatures. Huh? Okay, yeah. So what happens then is if some of those ballot initiatives get enough signatures and are certified by the Secretary of State to go on the ballot, the legislature has a certain number of days to act upon it. And they can vote, like I say, for your thing or not. If they vote for it, it doesn't make it to the ballot. On some of them, some types of them, if they vote no, or if they don't take any action at all, which is usually the case, they just let a time thing elapse, then you may have to go out and get another 11,000 certified signatures, and you go through the process all over again. It has to be new people that didn't sign it the first time. So that's it seems like a lot of work, and of course when it gets all thrown out by a judge. Now, if you're a candidate, you want to get on the ballot, they have the statewide offices, legislative offices. There's 160 state rep districts, there's 40 state senate districts, 200 legislators down at the state house there. And as far as how many signatures they need, there is another sheet at the beginning of the page on the right, or in there. This is a nice sheet the state has. All the rules and everything are available online. But this tells you the minimum number of signatures required for your district or for your area or for the state for different things. So for instance, state rep district is the smallest of the ones I'm addressing here. And again, there's local things, you know, which are a little bit less even for, you know, city council and stuff. But this is all for ballot stuff. State reps, 150 signatures from that state rep district, 300 for state senate. Statewide can be 5 to 10,000, and there's county things too. So that's all on here as to the minimum number of certified signatures that have to be gathered for that candidate to get on the ballot or for the ballot question to get on the ballot. And you always try to shoot for way more in case somebody wants to challenge it. You get over a certain limit, they do not allow a challenge. And I was told years ago that the Secretary of State, if nobody challenges, say you need 10,000 signatures and you have 10,200 that you know are good, and you turn those in and nobody challenges them, the Secretary of State may challenge and do their own audit. And they'll go through everything you gave them. I don't know if that has happened, but they have the right to do that. But generally that's reserved for your enemy on this, and they want to go in, and that means they got to get people, they got to pull all the sheets out and be with them. So it's a big deal for them to audit these. But
what point does it become at a point where?
Well, we use 10%. 10%.
10%.
So like for the statewide thing, we wanted to get over the 11,000 barrier.
And then they can't challenge it.
Right, then the state says, I don't care who you are, you're not going to come in and disrupt our office looking for 1,000 bad signatures. You're not going to find them. You might find 50 or 10, but we're not going to do it. So once you're over that limit, so that's what, and there's the number of raw signatures. You know, if you want 11,000 certified, you really need to get 15 to 18,000 raw signatures, because a lot of those aren't going to make it in you know, past the town clerks. So you always shoot for quite a higher number to start with, and then you end up with your number to turn in. And it's quite a thing, boy. I'll tell you. You turn this stuff into the Secretary of State and they get people and start going through these piles, especially these big statewide things. But they're used to doing it, and that's what they like to do. How do they come about? We talked about this a little bit on the ballot questions. There's 10 people, usually one person sort of drives the effort and gets 9 other people to sign on to the petition. In fact, if you look at the 2 that were on the left side of the folder, the 2 of the smaller ones, you'll see a couple of the same names are repeated on there. Like Rep. Jim Lyons and a couple other people. Everybody likes to go to these people, say, you're going to sign on to our thing here? And they say, sure. And I always volunteer to sign on to them, but by the time they do this, oh, we already got 10 people that'll do this. So that's how they come about. The petition has an address. And by the way, every petition has a place to send the petition to. It has an address. You notice on these 2 over on the right side in the middle, what this is when you turn these in at a town clerk, you can actually leave an envelope that's addressed back to that address, and that's the only place they will send it, is to the address on the petition. And that means they can certify them, put them in an envelope, and mail them out, and you don't have to go back and pick them up. In fact, with Scott's, we actually took a lot of them, mailed them to the town clerks with return address mailers with sufficient postage, and that were mailed back to the address on the petition. His is 453 State Street, and once once they see that on there, they'll mail it back to you. And that helps because you don't have to drive to 100 towns out in the middle of nowhere to pick up 5 sheets. If you have just a few, you can do that. And it works very well. We've never had a problem with sheets not arriving back. However, we did have a problem with a couple towns where the post office did not deliver the sheets in time to meet the minimum, the date, the cutoff date. And there was a couple towns missed it by 1 day. And the town clerk says, yeah, we always have a problem with our post office. They're always, we're not open. We're only open twice a week for 3 hours. They bring stuff here, they take it back, and they don't know if it's critical or not. So they just leave. By the time we get it, it's past the date. And that did happen on a couple things. But so you have the candidate pulling papers. They're the milestone dates, the dates the papers can start. Once the ballot question is approved by the Secretary of State and the Attorney General, then there's a date set, and from that date on, you can get the petition sheets printed up and start collecting signatures on them. The day to turn them in at the town clerks, the date you have to have them back at the Secretary of State. And sometimes you're dealing it with the town clerks that they have a week or 2 weeks to certify them, but if they use the whole time up, it only gives you a few days to collect from them and get them turned into the state. So you try to get some turned in early to get them back earlier, and then sometimes you have to bug the town clerks to get going on them too. And when there's these ballot initiatives, I don't know how they do it, because you go in the town clerks and there's piles of sheets of all these ballot letters, letter H and M and L, and they're just piles of them. And how do they make it through? And they have to do the red line and the whole thing on those. So it's, a lot of local people get a little job doing that too. They go in, they work, and they'll hire people to help out with that too. Now, also in the sheet here, over on the right side, there's a couple of handy things that we've had. One is an authorization papers. Okay, this is Committee to Elect Scott Lively, if you see this sheet here. There's 2 forms. One says, Town Clerk, Earl Shawley is authorized. Now, Earl's a good friend of ours. Hal knows him, and Earl's known well around the state. He's actually a great signature collector, but he gets paid to do it, but he knows what to do. He knows how to do it. But what you do is you give out letters like this to maybe 10 or 15 of your trusted people around the state, and they can go into a town clerk and pick up whatever signature sheets somebody may have dropped off, and they do not need necessarily the receipt. And you also all should have a receipt in your packet there. So you go in and they time stamp these in, they red line them, and they give you a receipt. It should show the date they did it and how many sheets you dropped off. They usually don't put the signature, the number of signatures or raw signatures on there. And you get a receipt. Now the holder of this, and whoever drops them off will get this with their name. They can go back and identify themselves and say, I'm picking up these sheets. But somebody with this letter can pick up any sheets without having to have the receipt. One thing we found is some towns have receipts without their town name on it. And it's like if you're going around to 15 towns and you don't check them, all of a sudden you got a couple of receipts and you go, they don't have their town name on their receipts. So I always check them and I make sure they put their town name is on there somewhere, because that does happen. The other one is an authorization to mail back. So you include this in a mailer, you mail a bunch of sheets into a town, and you say you're authorized to mail them back in the enclosed self-addressed envelope. And actually, town clerks like doing the mailback thing better than having to call you and have stuff aside and wait for you to come in. They love doing the mailback because they do it at their leisure. Then they pack them up, they drop them in the mail whenever, and off they go. And they actually like doing that. So that's a little nuanced thing that you get when you're all done with them. Oh yeah, some have done that, yeah. That's all it takes though. Well, sometimes the town clerks are not open on the last day. And you say, what do you do? Well, you're actually allowed to go to the police station. And a lot of the police stations, they may not have run into this, but you can go to the local police station, drop off signatures, have them give you a letter of things, and write on there, these were received at 3 p.m. on this day, and write it on the things, and then give you a receipt for that. And then the next day or 2 days later, the town clerk gets them. And they use that date. So there's that little out, and we've used that before too, on the last. There's also a couple sheets here. One is if you're a conservative in the state and you're dealing with a conservative issue, you may run into some physical resistance against what you're doing. And this has happened. There is a state law that it's a misdemeanor, but there's fines and imprisonment for anybody interfering with somebody gathering signatures. And I always have a few copies of these with me whenever I'm doing any of these things. I actually used it twice on the marriage petition thing, where it looked like somebody was going to come over and maybe damage some sheets that were done and give you a hard time and everything. And all it takes is them to draw a line on your sheet, you know, and they know it wrecks it. And so you have this, and as soon as somebody gives you a hard time, I've handed people, you better read this, and that usually does the trick. There's another thing about where you can collect, and there's a little thing about malls, shopping centers and malls and stuff. They have to give you permission in one way or another to be outside of, or sometimes even in their facility by law. They can't keep you out. Especially even if they don't like what you're doing, they can't kick you out. They can limit the hours you're there, the number of days that you're there, but like inside of a mall. But there is a law that says they really have to let you do that. So we always carry this with us too. And in the state, what are the towns that or the places that were good? It was Big Y. If you have a Big Y supermarket, they're the greatest people. And you go in and tell them, we want to be outside the two entrances. And they go, sure, we'll be out here for a couple hours. And Big Y's been very good at doing that. Other places, you know, Stop and Shop and some others give you a little resistance. But you have to say, you know, you really have to let us do this. And they reluctantly let you do that. But they also reserve the right to kick you out if somebody complains. And it's not unusual. Somebody may not like what you're doing. They don't even stop and talk to you. They just go in and complain. And then the manager will come out and say, well, we got complaints about you, you know, not even looking into it. And they want to throw you out. So you have to sort of duke it out with them a little bit sometimes too. So, and we always have voter registration cards. 5 minutes? Oh, okay. Voter registration cards. We've actually done voter registration at the same time we're collecting signatures. People have to be registered to vote, you know. So, but if they're not registered to vote, like when we do the big Russian churches, people are citizens, but they've never registered to vote. We'll have piles of these, and we'll have people filling these out, and we'll have somebody take them in. Usually it's at church on a Sunday. We'll have somebody take them over to the town clerks the next morning. Like it might be 2 or 3 towns where all the people are coming from who want to register to vote. And we'll say, turn these in and say, you got to get these in the system because you're going to be getting signature sheets in a few days with these people's names on them. So it's always good to have the voter reg forms.
Do they supply the voter registration cards? I've never done a voter registration campaign. Do they supply these cards to you?
These you can mail in.
No, but I mean, where do you get them to?
Oh, any like the Secretary of State's office have these, but there's only 3 in the state, but you can get these from your local town clerk, registrar of voters. They got these, and they have them in Spanish too. And they probably now they got them in 18 other languages, but they do have them in Spanish and English, and you can get big packages of them like that. And people can mail them in, or they can just give them to you, and somebody can take a whole pile and bring them in to the town clerks. So anyway, so there's a lot involved in the process. No one person does all the stuff. You know, you get involved in doing this, but we really need people to get out there and know, you know, it'd be great if there was kids that are maybe just registered to vote, 18, 19 years old, walking through the mall with 3 of their friends, and they see somebody there, and for one of the kids to say, hey, let's check this out. Let's not just walk past it. Let's see what they're doing, ask them what their thing is for, and we're registered to vote, now we can sign these things. And we really need people to do that, because there's generations of people out there that just have no clue. And they don't know what's going on here. So you really have to, some of them you have to approach, will you sign this? Oh, well, what's it for? What am I doing? Am I voting? I don't like that. You know? So you want people to willingly go over and sign things when people ask them or when you see them. So.
With all the educational institutions in Massachusetts, do you find that people who vote absentee in their state of origin but then go to school in Massachusetts also vote?
For absentee voting?
Well, they've already voted in their home state as an absentee.
Yeah.
But on election day, they show up at the polls and show their ballot ID.
Well, technically you're only supposed to be registered to vote in one spot, and that's why one of the questions, whatever district, are you a registered voter in the state? Are you a Republican or unenrolled in the state? Do you live in this state Senate district? And so on, you would ask them that. So if they shouldn't be registered in multiple states. Maybe some people are, but yeah.
When my daughter was in school in New Hampshire, they had buses to take kids to vote illegally.
Oh, yeah. Oh, when Elizabeth Warren ran the first time, we were doing standouts in Holyoke, and 2 people came up and wanted to know where they voted. And we said, well, where do you live? And they said, I don't know. And what street are you on? I think it's down that way. Wow. And here's people that just showed up at the polls, and you know what they were doing. And they didn't even know where they were supposed to vote, and they didn't even know where they lived, where their street was. They had a street name, but they didn't know where it was. Because if they told you that, then you could say, well, you're at that school, a mile down the road or something like that. But you're right, things like that.
We had 300 voters in Conway who gave them the press the same trailer. And when we sent back, after they signed the affidavits, we sent postcards, and they were not delivered. And all those
Yeah. There was a guy who was bragging that this was back in one of the George W. Bush elections. Him and people were going to go to Ohio to affect the swing state vote there. And they had a surplus of Democratic voters from Massachusetts and other states, or they had Democratic voters in states that were going to obviously be won by Republicans. People went to Ohio, found somebody who would say, you can use my address. They would register to vote. They would go back to their hometown, and on election weekend, they'd come out and they would vote in there. And that was sort of legal. It's on the gray fringes of not being ethical at all. But we actually knew people that did that. And that just went to another state to try to affect that election in that state. by using excess voters from one state. They didn't come back and vote in this state. They lived here, they got an address over there to register with, and they voted over in another state. So.
We have in New Hampshire a gentleman who watches all this and reports all this and follows cars around with their license plates, and he's really doing
Oh, yeah.
he's doing a really great job. But he discovered someone living at Attorney General, one of the attorneys in the Attorney General's office living at his house to stay here for voting, and caught that, and he also caught someone that was staying at a state senator's house and voting out of using her address and voting out of her house. And he puts it out there. He puts the names and everything.
And then there was a packet that was handed to illegal aliens that included a voter registration form. And they had them filling them out, so, so why they're not citizens, so they couldn't vote, but they were giving that to them anyway, so. Anyway, so I was going to ask for the sheets with the red lines on back, but I would say, since there's only about 10 people here, keep those. Those are good examples of what to look for, what a town clerk is supposed to do. And so there's all these little nuances of doing this process. How many signatures, the dates, the type of what people have to put on there, they're signing it. You're always telling people, don't go into the next line, and you can't have one signature overlapping another. But we found in most cases, the town clerks are pretty good on that. In a challenge, something like that could be thrown out. So trick is get plenty of signatures. And encourage people to look into these, and young people, once they register to vote, start using this. This is the next thing they can do besides voting. They can start putting their signatures down on petition sheets and encourage them. Yeah.
And I'm not familiar with it. But what's the nature of that?
Well, it's called the Transgender Rights Bill, and they say it has nothing to do with bathrooms, and that's what we're going to hear now from now till November. But what they is saying that a man could go into a woman's restroom and declare that right at that moment he's a woman. Doesn't even have to dress up like a woman. I've been trying to urge them to make some hard-hitting videos. They did one with a girl in a bathroom, and they pulled that down. It was being used for a while, and I couldn't get the real good reason why. But they really need them in school locker rooms, in school showers, and in gym places, workout places. Because that's a huge problem, and they need to show adults this can affect you too. Because that means a man could just walk into a lady's shower at a Fitness First place, and say, and you can't complain. You're the one that gets in trouble if you complain. You know.
My daughter, we visited Orlando recently at the Science Museum, and she saw a symbol that she had never seen before.
Oh.
Very confusing to her. And she said, Mom, first of all, I've noticed nobody's walking in there. And then a small lady was standing outside of it and said, I never have to clean that one, nobody ever goes into it.
Yeah.
So I had a bad feeling that when I asked that question, this had to do with, obviously, the state of Florida.
Right. They, I think this appeal petition process has a good chance of winning in the state. It really does, because it's going to the voters, and nobody wants to step on anyone's rights as a human being. We're not telling anybody they can't go into businesses. They can't go into private places and disrupt somebody of the opposite sex. It's just not a right thing to do. That's all we want to happen on that. So by them including the right to do that, they've made us get rid of the whole thing altogether. Just get rid of it. So that's what that vote will be on in November. But that all started as this. That all came about as this. So, yep. And it's just amazing when you see a statewide effort like that, of the stuff coming together. And I worked on Scott Lively's thing, and we just had people from all over with piles, folders, boxes full of this stuff. It was amazing when you do a statewide thing, yeah. So, all right, so that's it. We'll